I want to welcome you to Chemistry 101. So if I could have your attention up here. Oh, it's not the right session, so we'll go ahead and start another one. I want to thank all of you for being here today. This is the first of a series of 3 information sessions. We're calling them our campus forums instead of town halls because it is interactive. The last session is really meant to be even more interactive. We're not going to have a preset agenda. We'll be giving an assignment beforehand at the second session, and then you'll see what it's all about in the third session. So again, I welcome you. For those who weren't able to make it to this session, I want you to know that it is being videotaped and it will be available on a link. So let me go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, we're having 3 sessions, information sessions, every other week. So we're going to have it on Wednesdays, 4 o'clock, every other Wednesday at 4 o'clock. During this session, it's primarily based on the budget, and I'm going to start off by talking about our current year budget, how we developed that budget, and what has happened during the year to lead us into where we are today. And I'm also going to talk about a little surprise that we had. So let me go ahead and get started. As most of you know, many of you were involved in the development of the budget, which starts with program review. And that happens at this time of the year, even earlier actually, and it's submitted, and it goes through a process. When we develop that budget, we align that budget to our projected income. Because as any budget is developed for a period of time, you have to use expenses that you know you're going to have, plus you have the revenues that you know you're going to get. Unfortunately, in education in California, we don't always know what we're going to get. In fact, we haven't known what we're going to get for quite a few years. But we had 3 options that other community colleges chose last year for the 2011-2012 year. Those options was a best case scenario if the tax initiative passed last November, which never even got to the ballot. There was hope that it would, and that would give us a best case scenario. There were some other legislative languages that could have changed that a little bit, that would have given us kind of a middle of the road, and many colleges did budget to that middle of the road. And then, if you think in terms of doom and gloom and where the state is going, you budgeted for a worst case scenario. I want you to know IEC budgeted for the worst case scenario, knowing that it would be easier to put money back into the budget than take it out after we've already started rolling the year. So we started out this year with a balanced budget for 2011-12, budgeted at the worst case scenario, and that gave us a 5.8% reserve. You need to know that the state requires a 5% minimum reserve. You don't get shut down if you go below that, but you get on a warning list at 5%. Takeover can start when you fall below 3%. So just to kind of put it in perspective, over the last several years, we had been operating on a very healthy reserve. I can recall up to 27 or 29%. And over the last few years, we've used those reserves for actually our budget for current year. That eventually was going to come to where we are today, and that's a balanced budget with a little over minimum reserves. That's where we are for 2011-12. Now, something that was not anticipated this year at all was a very surprise additional cut to all of education in February. So this just happened about a month ago. That resulted for IEC finding an additional $1 million of our current year budget in order to still have cash by June 30th. And as you know, we develop the budget, we have contracts, we have financial obligations that our budget is based on. So that being said, this is what we did to find that $1 million. We asked all the VPs to go back to their areas and look at areas where there was money that was not tied to obligations, or perhaps areas that had more than we anticipated spending for the year, and identify those as money coming back into the budget to solve that little over $1 million. In the academic services area, we found $686,000, almost $687,000. I'll break that down in a minute. In student services, almost $200,000, and business services, 144,371 for a total of $1 million. So that took care of our current year without having to go back to anything. If we break that down, if you notice this year, we brought some of the classes from Calexico back over here, and we had budgeted for the whole year for Calexico. By doing that, we saved a total, I'm going too fast, of a little over $35,000 by bringing some of the classes in the spring. We found instructional salaries, primarily that's adjunct salaries, and Kathy's here if you want more details on that we had projected in terms of offerings for the spring semester. We didn't realize the FTEs that we anticipated for spring, so that resulted in a savings. Summer school, we were able to cut off for summer school for this summer, $171,000, and we were able to convert some of the budgeted items and instructional supplies to lottery funds. These are one-time funds that we receive every year for a savings of $67,000. That's for academic services. Under student services, we did have about, in DSPS, which has a required match from the district, because again of the offerings, we were able to find an additional almost $11,000. With financial aid salaries, we were able to temporarily shift some of the funding to categorical and still be within compliance with the law. Saved us almost $100,000. And for overload salaries not being utilized in matriculation, again, which was about $19,000 that we had budgeted before. Same thing with admissions. We had several positions that we lost in admissions this year that have not been filled. And were budgeted earlier in the year, so that saved us about $70,000. In the business services area, there are 3 custodian positions that we have not filled. They're frozen at this time. We had it in the budget that was almost $30,000. There was a reduction, deliberate reduction to security that the district pays that resulted in about a savings of $60,000. There were student salaries that had been budgeted in the purchasing department that we reduced about almost $6,000. And then we also deferred some additional scheduled maintenance that we had in the budget for additional savings of $144,000 in that area. So that's how we found $1 million without having to go back and say, you know, we need everybody to share in this cut. So we were able to save this year with still approximately 5.8% reserve. Now, all of you received an email that I sent last week to the campus regarding some pretty desperate rumors. The rumors were out there very quickly. I wish I could get information out that quickly, but that was really quick. And the rumors were that we were closing IBC starting July the 1st. And there's a lot of reasons why those rumors came to be. I don't know that any one thing led to that. If you look in the newspaper almost on a daily basis, you see the effects of the state budget. You see it in the terms of layoffs at different school districts, especially locally. You see what's happening in Calexico. The cash is not available, and potential takeover from the state. So you have a lot of things going on that add to the message that, you know, is IBC going to be open, you know, next year? So that was one of it. So I did send out a campus message assuring you know, staff and students that we are going to be open July the 1st. We do have a balanced budget. We are not on a watch list with the state. They have not notified us of any wrongdoing. We are fully accredited at this point, so we don't anticipate that. The following day, I received a call from the IB Press regarding a question. There were a couple questions. One was about summer school. The other one was about, is it true IBC's closing July the 1st? So I addressed that. It came out in Saturday's paper, and basically what I just told you in the email that I sent was the information that I provided to them. We posted that on the Facebook account, which most of our students are very familiar with, and our student portal. So I think, and I know in counseling, they just basically printed the message I sent out, and every time they saw a student, they'd share that, because one counselor in particular told me every single student the day before I had sent that email, or that day actually, had the same question: is IBC closing? Are my classes going to count when I transfer to university? Those are real fears and real questions. So again, that's what's happening with there. We'll watch that, you know, and hopefully you can inform your students who who have or that you happen to see, that is not a reality at this point. Those closures take a long time for it to happen. So again, it should be more of a positive message. As I mentioned, we're going to continue the forums. The next session, session 2 in 2 weeks, will concentrate primarily on the budget, the impacts to programs in terms of the budgets that we're developing, any workload reductions that we are currently experiencing, and obviously service reductions that we've already experienced and we anticipate continuing to go on until the state basically has more of a balanced budget. Our last session is really going to be a session about getting ideas. And I'll be more specific about it as we get into session 2. But primarily, we want to know ideas that you have. I've heard some, and what I'd like to do is get them in advance, because trying to, in a forum that you've got for about an hour, come up with ideas and that may work in terms of the future of IEC. It's hard to do that. But if you've got some time to think, we'll send a prompt question. You can submit this information. We'll gather that information. We'll put it up here, and we'll discuss it and see what kind of floats to the top. So I'm hoping that will be helpful in terms of getting together collectively to find this out. The good thing about that is if you're not able to make that session, anything you send in will be helpful at that point in time. We're also developing a web kind of forum and posting. It's going to be called, what is it going to be called? Redefining IBC. I think VP's help me. What was the name of it? Oh yeah, IBC, the Road to Recovery. How can I remember? Anyway, all these sessions will be videotaped, and so for those who are not here, they'll be able to view it. We'll also have, what we're hoping to do is on a weekly basis, have updated information. Sometimes on the budget, sometimes on other things. Just information going out to the campus community. So that's what's going on right now. That's what IBC Road to Recovery. Weekly updates and the video links. For students, we're also going to be doing forums for students. They're going to be on the off week, so we're going to actually be doing forums for the next 6 weeks. Starting next week, we're going to do our first student forum. The format is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be really based on what we're hearing from students, or assumptions that they're making. We've heard a couple of them today. One is that we're closing July 1. The other one is, are the credits or the units that I have on my transcripts going to still be valued when I transfer? Will they be accepted from the university? Those kinds of things will be addressed. We're going to be working with the associated students in order to elicit kinds of assumptions or questions they have. So the format, and it will be also every other week, will be to get these questions ahead of time and be able to address them to the students in a forum. Here, it'll be earlier in the afternoon, and I think we're going to schedule those on a Thursday so that we have the most number of students available for those forums. Next, this is John's. I'm going to have John Lau talk about, this is a presentation he provided to the Board of Trustees in February at the board retreat. I think it really helped the board members and others who were present really kind of see where IBC has been since, let's say, 2005 in terms of our revenues and our expenses, where we are today, and what kind of assumptions we're going to be making moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to John. John?
Good afternoon or evening. What I want to do with you is, we're going to do overviews, not detail. I think before you understand detail, you need to understand the overviews and the foundation of the financial structure. So what I want to start with is revenues. How do we get paid? Well, unlike a high school, we don't get paid for every student. The state caps us. They say we'll pay X amount of students. Anything over that, you don't get paid for. So in this area here, we were in our high growth areas. You can see this is what we're being paid for, and this is what we were serving. And we were doing that because of a basic philosophy which is going to change in the future. We were doing full access. We tried to take in any student that wanted to come in. When we get in and talk a little more, you're going to find out that no longer be our direction that we go, because the state is mandating a different approach to student learning. So what has happened between here and here? We've lost about $4.8 million. So So this year, which is 2012-13, we have about 4.8 million less than we did here. You can see that really this growth and the scale of this is very similar to this year, and that was 205. So one of the things we did in this period, if I heard Ed talk about it when he was the president, is that we were going to become a mid-sized college. Well, at this time, it appeared we would be. So our infrastructure, our staffing, and how we paid and everything was predicated on strong growth. Okay, that stopped. That's not going to happen anymore. We're down here. Unfortunately, we still have a structure that is reflective of that type of revenue stream. So we have to change it. Now, do we think this is a blip and we're going to shoot back up in the next couple of years? No, we don't, for these reasons. The first one is, as I said, the state is kind of changing the focus of a community college. There's three main areas. Transfer, I get this one not right, it's career technical, I always mess that one up, and high-end basic skills. So we're going to be limiting the type of student that we really try to work with. That's state mandated, that's not the college making an independent decision on its own. And then, in talking with Jan, they've changed the way that they're going to get financial aid to students. Right now, about 85% of our students, I believe, are touched by financial aid in some way. They're going to make it harder to get financial aid. And Jan said next year, maybe 1,200 students will be impacted. That doesn't mean they won't come. It means they might not. So when you look at all that, you look at the current financial situation of the state, there's no reason to believe that we're going to rebound greatly from this in the next few years. So we need to have a structure that is reflective of this, not this. And this is the thing that generates most of our revenue, is the students we serve are paid for. An example, in this year, they're cutting us down to 600 and 129 students are going to pay for it. This thing, we're as high as about 7,200. You can't have that type of decline in your business and not make significant changes. It's like your own house. If you had a house payment, all of a sudden it doubled and your salary stayed the same, you'd be in a little trouble. Well, that's kind of what we're at. We don't have the organization to deal successfully with this type of environment. So this coming year is going to be very stressful because we're going to need to move towards an organization that supports that. And it's going to be very controversial how we get there. But the thing is, if you understand this is our reality, we have no choice. We have to do it. And so, working together, we will do it. I love this slide because it captures what the college has done financially in a very concise way. The red is expenses, the green is ongoing revenues, and this is our savings account, our reserves. When we were in 206-07, we had a lot of money in reserves. And we were going with the philosophy of serving as many students as we could and giving raises as appropriate. So what happened? We started spending more than we get. The gap was being filled by these reserves. So look what happens to our savings account. It goes down, and we continue to spend more than we get. If this was your household, you'd be in bankruptcy. Well, that's kind of what's happening to college. We got to change what we do. And why do I say that? If we did a budget next year based on current contracts and agreements, we'd be $1.9 million in the hole. So what is this? How does this impact us? Well, from a decision-making standpoint, it makes us be more conservative when we make estimates, because we don't have a safety net that if we don't do that right, that we can use our reserves. They're gone. So the old way of doing business, where we throw our reserves at our problems, that's come to an end. That's got to change our business strategy and how we do things. The challenge is going to be, how do we do this in an effective manner that serves the mission of the college, which is educating students? It's going to be a challenge, but if I can leave you with one message off this, we can no longer do business like we used to do. That has ended, and this right here tells me that. It's the numbers top. This tells me we can't do this anymore. So we're going to have to make changes, and we'll make those changes working with everyone. They're going to be substantial, but they have to be made. Let me show you what I'm looking at in the next year when we've been over a potential budget to show you why I'm saying that. Okay, the one thing I'd like you to do, if I ever tell you that I'm giving you a forecast or anyone, the forecast is no good if you don't know the assumptions that were made to do the forecast. And so anything that's a forecast on its own is worthless if you don't understand the assumptions that were used to develop the budget. So what did we do? We took a conservative viewpoint. We say the half-cent sales tax in November won't pass. Because we have no reserves, we can't be optimistic that it will be. Because if we plan for it passing and it doesn't, we don't have time to react. So we're going to take a conservative viewpoint. It's not going to pass. Then the state has told us they're going to fund us 6,129 FTEs. Our high point, we're more close to 7,200. This is a pretty locked number. We think the state revenue is going to go down by 821,000. This year, the $1 billion, the reason why they came to us in February is they over budgeted property tax and student fees. They were off, so they said because we didn't budget right, we need another $1 billion from you. We don't think that's going to happen again. Hopefully they budget a little better this coming year. We think that all labor contracts are destroyed, I like this term, all labor contracts are put in our budget as they would be if we didn't change it. Legally, we're obligated to reflect the cost of our current agreement until we negotiate a new one. That's a big item because we have a lot of money in this area. Health insurance, we think we're getting an increase of around $350,000. And we think that's probably could go up a little after a conversation today. And if we had to miss it, we would restore our stability of FTEs for 11 and 12. So these are the assumptions that are going to drive the budget that I'm going to show you now. Okay, as you can see, we've got declining revenues. We've got 32,910,000, and that's down because our paid FTEs have dropped down to 6,129. Our salaries are predicated on the existing labor agreements if they go forward unchanged. We've done a pretty good job of limiting these expenses. So really, when we're looking for our savings, it's got to be in the first three items. That's where all the money is. That's where we need to live. So now you're like, what happens? Okay, we would be in the hole, $1.9 million. That just brings you to zero. And as Victor said, they want you to have some type of reserve, maybe 5%. If we restore it to 5, we need this much more. If you add these two numbers up, it's about $3.8 million. That's the amount of money that we have to find here. We don't have any savings that helps us get there. And one of the things that we have to do because the state doesn't pay us timely is we borrow money. You've probably heard about the trans. What is that? Well, we don't have cash flow because the state sits on the money and they don't pay us. So we have to go out to a vendor. And we have to borrow the money. They have to have the confidence that we can repay it. You know, if you've been to a bank lately and you go in and you go, yeah, I want to borrow 20, but I want to make 10, but you know, I'm good for it, you probably don't get it. Same with lenders that are going to invest money. If we can't have a financial statement that shows that we have the ability to repay what we borrow, we won't get it. What happens if we don't get it? We don't make payroll. Well, I'm saying these things, while they're bad, to me they're not really bad. If we all acknowledge they exist, collectively, we can work towards it not happening. If we don't acknowledge it, and we go along our merry way, this is a recipe for disaster. So we don't really have a choice. We need to find $3.8 million next year. And so that'll be the challenge. And so you're going to hear a lot of hardships. And one thing that's going to happen is certain people will think other people should give more. But collectively, we need to do what it takes to stabilize the college. And a lot of that's going to come through negotiations. Because that's where the money is. The money's up in these three items. There's not much we can do in this area. We can get some savings, but those are the items that will really contribute to the $3.8 million problem that we have. And so it's going to be a challenging year for us. Are there any questions, or I went too fast? Or?
We have, let's see, we have Vicki and Paula with mics, so raise your hand. You've got a question right here. Eric?
Expenses got certificated and classified. Where are the administrators listed and where are the classified managers listed?
The administrators are listed in certificated salaries.
Classified managers are under
They're under classified, that's correct. And that is based on retirement, SPRS versus PRS. One other thing I just want to add to what John mentioned. He alluded to a couple of things that we really can't control for, but we really need to watch for. This year we anticipated, for us, we've always experienced over as long as I can remember, you offer it, they will come. That's not been our problem filling the seats. It's been a problem providing the seats for our students. This spring, we found something very different. We didn't have the number of students we anticipated based on the schedule. There were a lot of reasons for that. We had instituted a kind of a no tolerance in terms of owing fees. We have to collect those fees because the state assumes that we are getting the money, so our portion is reduced by that amount, so we need to be fiscally responsible and collect those fees. We instituted a policy that they had to pay the fees. The other thing that happened is the enrollment fee this year went up by $10. It's scheduled to go up by another $10 for the fall semester. So that may take an impact. But the biggest part of it is, as you mentioned in financial aid, about 80% of our students are in some form of financial aid. But the largest form of financial aid is the Board of Governors waiver program. That is not a cash grant, but it waives the enrollment fee to students who are eligible. In the past, standards of academic progress have never been applied to that waiver because it wasn't a cash aid, it was a state program. And therefore, if you were eligible, your fees were waived. So you didn't have to pay that enrollment fee, which is now going up to $46 per unit. Starting in the fall semester, standards of academic progress will apply. So when he talked about a certain number of students that may be impacted by that, these are students who would otherwise have been eligible but now don't have that revenue to pay the enrollment fee. So they may not even be able to get here. So that may impact our enrollment going forward. So those are things we can't really control, but we need to, keep an eye on it and anticipate it. So just want to clarify that. Any other questions that you might have having to do with budget? Yes.
I'm a little more optimistic about that tax increase that Jerry Brown's asking for. I know that our union is supporting it. I know the college is supporting it. Is there, what effect is that going to have if they do pass that?
The 1.5%?
Is there something that you've worked out that can give us a little silver lining?
It depends on which one. I think there's two that are competing. What I understand from Brown's proposal, that when the bulk of the money he would get wouldn't go towards added operations, it would backfill the deferred. Like right now, there was about $8 million of deferred revenues. They would take care of that, reduce the debt of the state. So it really wouldn't help you in operations, except it would cut down, you have to borrow money. So we don't know enough on what form that would take or anything to really count on it right now. I think that's something that would happen in our favor and we were better, then we would embrace that and make the changes. But I don't think, for all the reasons we discussed today, we can afford to be optimistic about anything that's going to happen because we don't have reserves to cover a bad guess.
Can we take a look at the numbers broken up by the 50% ball? Teaching versus non-teaching? In there, do we have that?
I'm glad you brought that up. There's two things you have to do within a budget to be successful. The first one is ongoing expenses have to equal ongoing revenues. That takes care of our imbalance problem. The second one is we have to meet 50%, which simplified says that 50% of our expenses should be expended on people who are in the classroom teaching. And that's something we always comply with and will continue to do so in the future. So I don't have that information, but I'm glad you brought it up because it is an underlying thing we have to address when we do our budgets.
We're currently complying.
We're about 50 out of 10. So
I have another question. Have we a projection of how the financial aid changes are going to impact our fill rates of enrollment for the next semester?
I shoot that to Kathy and Jan, but I don't believe. Oh, gosh, she's the enrollment guy.
Okay, repeat that question again. Do we have a sense?
Do you have a sense of the impact that the change in the financial aid rules and the increase in the tuition fees is going to have on our fill rates and student attendance?
Our fill rates, and what Matthew's talking about is the percentage of the students who make up the quota that's set for each course. So we've anticipated approximately, Jan, correct me if I'm wrong, about 1,200 students who may be adversely affected to that.
One of the issues is going to be the eligibility for BOC fee waiver. We know when that goes into effect beginning in the fall, based on enrollment in spring, that about 1,400 students would not get a BOC. Now, out of those 1,400 students, how many of them would not come to school because they didn't get a fee waiver? That I can't guess how many would choose, but the $46 increase is $670 to take a full-time load. So if you've never had to pay for that before and all of a sudden we tell you you're going to, I would say it would be a significant number won't come. In addition to that, certain eligibility factors for the financial aid grant, the federal financial aid grant, which is Pell, are changing, which are going to make it more difficult for students to stay here more than 1 year. They're changing the satisfactory academic progress, and they're changing the repeatability rules, so students can't take a class more than 3 times. All of these little rules are going to negatively impact our enrollment. Are we factoring that into what we project our enrollment will be? Will it be 6129? Will it be slightly less than that? Do we front load fall and then hope we meet that number so we don't have to worry about spring? All of those kind of things are under discussion. But I think, no, Matthew, we don't have a strong sense. I can't tell you, I know for a fact 1,500 students won't be here in the fall because of BOG, but I know there will be a significant number of students who will not get BOG, and the possibility that they won't then be able to afford to come to school.
Now, in answer to your second question, Kathy can kind of address the fill rate a little bit better.
Actually, should have Matthew address the fill rate, since he always gets the numbers for me.
Fill rate guru.
But if you look back at the fall and prior to the fall, our fill rates have been right around 100%. In years past, they've been as high as 103%. And that's because faculty have said, you know, I'll see what I can see in my classroom. I think the faculty would have said that this spring. The problem with this spring was there were not students here to fill up those classrooms. For the first time this spring, we had implemented wait lists. The wait list worked. We thought we would have, you know, enough students on wait lists that would tell us in the future, you know, how to schedule classes. The first day of the spring semester, I was kind of stunned when I drove in at 8:15 because I am a vice president. And no, I was doing things at home. But anyway, I drove in and I could find a parking place. And I thought, uh-oh, something's wrong. And I know that's not very scientific. It's not empirical data. Somebody asked that question in the academic senate. But, you know, that parking lot stuff is pretty true. When you drive in at 8:15 on the first day of the semester, you can park. It tells you, uh-oh. So, sure enough, it bared out that this spring our fill rate is somewhere around
92%.
92%. So it went from 100% in the spring, in the fall, to 92% in the spring. Now, with another $10 fill rate, all of these things with financial aid, what's it going to be in the fall? I bet you it's not 100%. So we're going to have to plan accordingly. Obviously, I'm not good at it. I didn't win the lottery last night. I'm still here. So we're starting tomorrow. We're putting academic services and student services together to come up with some guidelines to figure out how to schedule for next year, which we'll talk about at the next forum. But our fill rate's going down.
Matthew, do you have another separate question? I think Gordon, do you have a question? I saw your hand earlier.
I'm looking at your charts up there. They're showing the number of students you accepted as opposed to the number of students you were being paid. It occurs to me that this is 4 years. This couldn't have just snuck up on you. You didn't just realize this yesterday. So why were we not making efforts to mitigate this problem?
I think there's a couple of reasons, Gordon. One is probably we thought that we would outrun our expenses by increased revenues. There wasn't an inkling that the state would be in as bad a condition as it was, thinking that we would continue to grow. Like I said, a year ago, Ed said we're on our way to becoming a mid-sized college. That is no longer true. The other thing is why didn't we need more? It was made, the decision was made to liquidate the reserves. And that's history, and I'm not going to really talk about that because it's done. Basically, it was decided that reserves would be taken down. And how were these things taken down primarily in labor contracts. And that's not a good or bad thing, that's just an observation. I'm not. So what happened is once you have something, it's hard to turn it around. So we were hoping that the state would stay good, but now we see we have no reason to hope that we're going to go back to 7,200. So now, unfortunately, we're at the cliff and slightly over it. And we're going to do now what we have to do to make ourselves stable. And when we get accreditation next year, there are two big things in the financial area. They say, is your institution stable and sustainable? Right now, that would be a hard question for us. So how are we going to address this? Well, one of the things we've talked about at the exec committee, and it's getting out, is these things don't happen very often. Kathy uses the analogy, if you're going to get a brain surgery, you probably don't go to the local doctor. You probably go to the local, so we're going to do that. And our local doctor, the person we're going to use is Big Mac. We're talking to them about having them come in and work with us to make sure the solutions we're doing are the best the college can make. And the state kind of agrees with that because they've offered us $150,000 to help pay for that study. The total study is about $215,000. So the college will pay $65,000 and the state will pay $150,000. We really think a third party looking at us is very helpful. We're not fearful they're going to come in and, be pointing fingers and giving us a bad report. We know what they're coming in. They're truly going to be a partner with us over all aspects of the college and working with them together. We hope to have a good plan that changes this. But we didn't react, you're right, because we thought the state would keep growing, and it didn't. And we talked about dwindling reserves for a couple of years. It was mentioned, but it was decided that we could get along with it because we thought we would climb out of it, and unfortunately the state's just gone south on us. So we're reacting now because we have no choice. But together, we can make the changes, but it's going to be a great sacrifice. That's a huge number to find. And I don't want to sugarcoat that because I'd be doing a disservice to all of you. 3.8 million in our budget is going to be a real challenge to find. The good news is we know we need to do it. And we have the courage to do what needs to be done to stabilize our college. And that's really the question before us. And I think we do.
Gordon, just also to add to that, up until a couple of years ago, we're capped, unlike K-12, that, whoever you educate, that's the number of students that you're paid on. And as I mentioned, in colleges, community colleges in particular in California, you're capped at a certain level. And sometimes you're below that cap and you don't get what you have coming to you. And sometimes you're over-capped. And we've been over-capped over the last 30 years several times. And that's also an indicator you need to try to keep them equal. However, the state usually at the end of the year projects a growth. We haven't seen growth in the last couple of years, but we have in the past. And there was anticipation a few years back when we were doing this that they would be paying for growth, and they actually did. I mean, we were actually able to grow up to the 7,400 FTEs before it started really going down, and it went down quickly. So that is another piece of it. You always have to say, okay, you want to get paid for what you're allowed to get paid for, but do you go a certain percentage over to realize additional monies that may come back at the end of the fiscal year? And the state does give you those growth. And that growth is permanent, so usually, until now. So if you are capped at, let's say, 7,400, and you were paid for 100 FTS growth, that becomes your new cap for the following year. So it's kind of a gamble, but at the same time, it's been the way many colleges have grown as well. So that also kind of played into that factor, I think. Question, Francis?
Yeah, I have a question. Fall semester, what was our FTEs count in fall semester versus our FTEs count in spring? And the reason I'm asking is fall was business as usual. Spring had several different factors that affected our student enrollment. One was students had to pay their fees outright within 5 days or be dropped. And there was a lot of commotion with that. Students were able to utilize the wait list and had a total misunderstanding that if they were waitlisted, they weren't going to be accepting crashers. When that myth went around. And then the third one is financial aid terminated a significant amount of students in the spring term that due to probationary factors, and they had been so warned. And so that was another factor that I think predicated maybe a considerable drop in the spring. So my question again is, what was our FTES in the fall, and what was our FTES or what is our current FTES in the spring?
Kathy, do you remember Paul?
I know that.
Oh,
sir. I
Jen.
looked it up this morning. We had 3,019 in the fall.
Mike, we're recording. Mike?
We recorded 3,019 FTES in the fall. We are currently this morning at 2,719. So we had projected 3,000 for the fall, so we hit that. We projected another 3,000 for the spring. We're not going to hit that. But now, the 2719 is WISH class only, if you know between WISH and DISH. WISH is the weekly, that's the classes that are scheduled from first of term to end of term. At end of term, we'll report the DISH, the daily contact hours, and so that will increase. I'm hoping like 200, because then with the very, very small summer, we should be right on target for the exact number of FTEs that we got paid for.
So additionally, if we're able to do what we need to do this year, we'll be on target. And then what we also need to consider is that in the fall, or as of this summer, there's going to, I understand that the $46 unit increase fee is starting this summer. So if it starts with summer school, there's probably going to be some shock there. There's going to be some dropouts as well as openings. And what are we going to do as an institution to notify the community that there's an increase in fees, students need to start preparing, family needs to start preparing, so that when they register for their classes, if they get them, they need to pay the fees so they don't get robbed.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways, and Jen, you can add to this, but you know, the schedule just went out on Facebook, and I think it's scheduled to go out there. So I think it's important for us to also give the message that Francis talked about, and that is the change in the fee structure. That said, remember, the majority of our students are eligible for the BOG, and if they receive the BOG, which covers those fees in the fall and spring, they're automatically covered for the summer, because that's part of this fiscal year. They're not impacted by the changes in the law for BOG. Those are impacted, those will be impacting students in the fall semester. So they're okay. If they got a BOG in the fall and spring, they'll also get it in the summertime. Unlike many colleges that don't have that same percentage. So Jen, do you have anything to add to that?
In terms of outreach, I think, and this is our big outreach season of the year, the information regarding the fee increase has been in the press. There's been some discussion of it on Facebook and Twitter and all the social media outlets. And we did, when we went out to the high schools with financial aid, inform the students that there would be a fee increase and that the requirements for the BOG fee waiver were changing. So has there been a concerted media campaign for that? I don't think so. I think we've relied on messaging that was going out anyway from the campus. And then the last thing would be an email blast to every current student that we went out.
You also have to realize that because of our calendar, this particular session is our only session for summer that we're planning, and it will start in May and end by the end of June. So this session is really for our currently enrolled students. Students who are enrolled in high school and typically like to get ahead of the game and take summer school classes. This won't be the session for them because they'll still be enrolled in high school. Not that they can't, but it makes it a lot more difficult because those courses are usually in the daytime when they're in school. So this is primarily the session that in good times would be for the continuing students here at IEC, not for those coming back from the university and not for those new high school students. Those would be future summer sessions when we get there in the future. Question where?
John, you talked about a plan and you said that this is like a household, you don't have the money, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. Is this road to recovery, Victor, and so forth, is this is going to be a huge effort, huge. Okay, you can almost read between the lines how huge this is going to be, and you all said you're going to include everybody. So do you have a plan, and not concrete, but when you talk about changing lifestyles and changing whatever, when we've got to, we see all the little bars, and then we see that we're down here from 2005, then that's pretty bad. So how bad do we have to really get in gear here from here to July 1st, to whatever is?
I think the first thing that we talked about is critical to this discussion. We're no longer thinking we're a large medium college. We now come to the realization that we're a small college. We've talked about even, can we generate 61 FTEs? So I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is we're not the college we used to be. We're smaller. Those areas that we've created and structured to serve a much larger population, they have to go away. I know when I talk like this, some people think it sounds really harsh, but unfortunately, it requires that type of discussion to do what we need to do. So we're going to look at the structure of the college, or the areas that, because of what the state's directing or whatever, we may have to not do those anymore. And there's a couple ways you save money. You can have the same amount of people and pay them less, or you can have less people and pay them more. So it's a collective decision on what we want to do. And there's going to be pain. You can't find that kind of money in this budget and not do very draconian things. It's not possible. I'd be lying to you if I said it was. It's not. So the challenge we're going to have is how do we make the changes needed in the most effective manner to teach students and to be a stable institution. And there's many different ways to skin a cat. As Victor said on the third meeting, we're going to look for some information from you. But I guess the only message I'm going to leave with you, there is no answer that doesn't address that. That has to be discussed, and we have to have a solution for it. And we have some ideas, but we want to kind of wait. I'm really looking forward to the third meeting to hear ideas that you have, and we can discuss those. But from my perspective, the biggest thing will be in negotiations, because that's where most of the money is. So labor negotiations are very important issue.
I was wondering, as I'm looking at these, the chart before and then this graph, and you talked about the money coming out of the top two areas out of certificated and classified. Eric brought up the point that within these two areas is the administration and the classified management. Is there any way to get some information that would correlate to the graph that we saw, that will show us what happened if we break out those four areas instead of two areas, how they grew and adjusted along with the money, that the incoming money and the outgoing money and the...
We started looking at data, and one thing that surprised me, and this is soft data, I like to use that term a lot. We're going to firm it up, and I'm going to give you the soft data look right now. I thought there would be a huge difference on that bar graph when we were at 205 and we're coming back to that year. I thought there would be a huge difference in employment. There's not, I thought this would have much more because of all this. There is some increase, but not to the amount we thought. So what I have to think is, and when we got our last rating, we have bonds and we get bond ratings, and they give you a report card. And one of the last things they said when they downgraded us is that our contracts are too rich. Now that's not attacking a person, that's just saying giving your financial ability to pay, you've kind of overreached. So I think one of the things that we'll see when we analyze this is that it's a combination of few employees. We know classified managers are more than they used to be, so I think we'll find out one of the big things is the raises we gave, or the 100% health insurance we gave. You're going to find out that really it's not people, it's what we pay our. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but I'm saying that's going to be our financial reality. We have to acknowledge, that's a good question, we have to acknowledge how we got here, because that's how we're going to have to unwind it. So we'll be looking at that, and we'll be sharing that with all of you. But none of this is personal, from the finance guy, it's not. I want the college to survive, be stable, and give the best education it can to a student. And we need to look at how do we accomplish that. And maybe there's been some mistakes made in the past. We made some assumptions of growth that didn't happen. But to me, me, that's all irrelevant right now. The problem right now is this year. But how do we get through it?
Well, thank you. I really feel that this has been, at least to me, has been helpful. And I think going forward, it is going to be very helpful. I'm very optimistic about one thing, and that's that what I've seen over the last couple of months is that all of us inclusively, are really worried about the same thing. And we're all willing to be part of that solution. And that's something that's not always been there. But I have to say, all of you have really stepped up to the plate and said this college is important, and that what we do with our students as a whole is important. And I really do think that we will continue to work together as an institution and get ourselves out of this. So I want to thank you again for coming. We are going to have this going, and look forward to seeing you and maybe some others in 2 weeks. So again, thank you all very much.